Dear colleagues, good afternoon. It's a real pleasure to be with you today. The pleasure would be even greater if I was able to join you in person. I would like to highlight how honored I am for the opportunity to speak at this important conference, and especially knowing the achievements of your country in the field of gender equality. I am Sandra Jovanovic Belotic. I am psychologist and I am training and capacity building manager in WWP. And my presentation will focus on safe and accountable perpetrator work, so current practices in Europe and quality standards. Before I start, I would like to give just a brief information about our organization. So we are WWP. This stands for the European Network for the Work with Perpetrators of Domestic Violence. We are a network membership organization, and we unite around 70 perpetrator programs, victim support services, and research institutes across Europe. We currently have members from 34 European countries. So together with our members, we join forces in ending domestic violence and violence against women. And we do that by focusing on safe and accountable work with perpetrators, mainly men. My presentation will have 4 key segments. So I will start with speaking about perpetrator programs. Then I will give a really brief overview of the role of frontline professionals. Following that, I will present programs in Europe. So I will speak about some good practices and some common challenges that we encounter Europe-wide. And finally, I will introduce you to the newest European standards for perpetrator programs and the accreditation system for perpetrator programs that we are developing. Okay, so let's start by focusing on perpetrator programs and what is their role in combating violence in the overall system and coordinated community response to violence. Perpetrator programs are one of the key elements of keeping survivors safe and perpetrators accountable. And it's also really important to be aware of the scope of the problem that we are dealing with as the whole system, but also as perpetrator programs. So knowing the statistics of how widespread violence against women is, if we use this metaphor of a football team, we can say that statistically, 9 of these men will be violent with a partner or ex-partner over the course of their life. So we see that, for one, we are dealing with a really widespread and serious problem, but also our systems and perpetrator programs have a big number of potential clients. I would like you to think about domestic violence through a metaphor of a fire. So if there is a fire, and also knowing the proportions of domestic violence in Europe, we can say that every 3rd household in Europe has been affected by a fire at least once. So then the question, what do we do when there is a fire, is really, really relevant question. And many of us will immediately say, well, let's see who is hurt and let's save survivors, let's support survivors. And this is the right thing to do in a case of a fire. So we need to support survivors, we need to make sure that they are safe, and we need to support them to recover. Many of you will also say, yes, we also need to work on a prevention. We need to ensure that people understand the danger, that they are more cautious, that they know what to do when there is a fire. And this is also really, really relevant question. However, if we do just that, but don't put the fire down, then we are dealing with an ongoing danger, risk, and harm. If we don't put the fire down, this fire will endanger other victims, other people in the community, and it's an ongoing problem. So we need to put down the fire. And this is the same thing when we think about domestic violence. When there is a domestic violence, yes, we do need to prioritize survivors, focus on survivors, and support them throughout their journey to safety and recovery. We do need to work on the prevention. However, we also need to put down the fire. We need to work with men who cause this fire. So this is exactly what perpetrator programs do, and that's why they are so relevant in the whole system for dealing with domestic violence and violence against women. To be more precise, why do we need to work with perpetrators? It's because many repeat violence in their new relationships, because even when there's a separation, we know that this is another risk factor, and we need to deal with that as well. We also know that children are involved. So when we support men to stop their violence and change violent behavior, we are actually supporting breaking down of the cycle of transgenerational transmission of violence. We also know that this is something that many survivors want. They want men to change and violence to stop. We also know that perpetrators are not a happy cohort of men, that they also experience negative consequences, and that some of them do want to improve their relationships with their partners, children, and to change their behavior. And as mentioned before, perpetrator programs are one of the ways to keep perpetrators to account, and we know how relevant this is. There are other interventions that focus on putting down the fire. However, perpetrator programs bring an added value in the coordinated community response. So if we use a metaphor of an iceberg to present violent behavior, then what we see on the surface is just the tip of the iceberg. And if we would like to address this tip of the iceberg, it's not going to be enough to focus only on the tip of the iceberg. So it's not going to be enough to focus only on the violent behavior. We need to look at the things that are under the surface. So root causes of violence and underlying factors of violence, such as gender inequality, gender-related beliefs, unhelpful thinking, and so on. And this is exactly what perpetrator programs do. So they address violent behavior by melting down and changing and reshaping those elements that are under the surface and that are actually cause of the violent behavior. If we think about other interventions, such as restrictive and repressive measures, we can say that they are absolutely very relevant and we need to have them. However, the impact that they have usually doesn't go below the surface. It usually impacts just the tip of an iceberg. However, if we have perpetrator programs jointly with restrictive and repressive measures, we can actually melt down the iceberg. So it's really important also to keep that in mind and to be aware of the added value of perpetrator programs that they bring to the coordinated community response to stop the violence. However, perpetrator programs can't do this on their own, and also frontline professionals who work in social protection, police, judiciary system, they have a really, really vital and important role in this process. The reason why we've chosen to speak about this is because we see that this is something that is more and more relevant Europe-wide. and that countries invest more and more effort to support frontline professionals to be able to identify, address, and refer men to programs. Because one of the learnings was that it's not enough that you just have perpetrator programs. You also need to build pathways to perpetrator programs, and some of these pathways are built through the legislation. However, some of these pathways need to be supported by the frontline professionals. So frontline professionals have an important role and several really complex steps to take before the referral. So they need to identify domestic violence. They also need to be skilled to be able to speak about domestic violence with men. They also need to have advanced set of skills to be able to motivate men for change. We know how hard this is in most situations, and also to make effective and clear referral to perpetrator programs. As we have limited time at the moment, I will not go into each of these steps. I would just highlight one more time that if frontline professionals are not supported to be able to implement all these steps, then perpetrator programs and the outcomes that we want are much weakened. If you would like to learn more and understand more, I invite you to have a look at our webpage and the Engage toolkit, which presents a unique guidance and roadmap for frontline professionals who are interacting with male perpetrators of domestic violence. Some of the things that you will be able to find there is actually a support how to speak with men about their violence. This is not an easy task. Men don't want this. Also, some frontline professionals are not sure how to do it. Some they're afraid. So this toolkit really gives you useful tools for focusing on violence in a way that's going to be accepted by your client and in a way that's not going to increase the resistance. So these funnel questions, for example, are one of the things that you can use. It's also important to be aware of good practices in making referrals to perpetrator programs. So it's really important to inform men about this and inform him about why is he being referred, what are benefits from the program for him, but also for others, what are his responsibilities, his rights, what he can expect, because this really decreases the anxiety with which men come to programs. Also, it's important to think and agree with him on how you will continue to work together and what will be the mechanisms of the feedback while he's in a perpetrator program. And one of the crucial things is to remember not to refer men who use domestic violence to any form of anger management programs, couple counseling, mediation, or family therapy, because they are not suitable for this kind of clients, and they can actually create additional harm and present additional risk. The role of frontline professionals is really vital, and frontline professionals also need to be supported to be able to carry out that role, especially in those countries where perpetrator programs are not mandatory for clients. So in these countries, having skills to motivate men for change and for perpetrator program is even more essential, although this is essential skill in all cases and in different kinds of frameworks. Okay, so now we will move to programs in Europe. I will present programs in Europe through some of the common challenges that we see, but also some trends in ensuring safe and accountable perpetrator work throughout the country. We have limited time, so I've chosen just a few areas that we think that are crucial for safe and effective perpetrator work. So one of the things that are changing and that are now present in perpetrator work is understanding programs as broad interventions. So many countries in Europe, but not just countries, also the standards imposed by the Council of Europe, also by WWP, say that perpetrator programs are more than just what you work directly with men and activities that you conduct with men and the curricula and the program that you have. This is, of course, really important. However, it's also really important to be aware and to make sure that service providers that provide this service can do it in an adequate way. So who are service providers? What are their capacities? In which sectors they function is also really important for the outcomes of perpetrator programs. But also, what are the structures supporting perpetrator programs? So issues around funding, multi-agency work in the country, and how well perpetrator programs are embedded in the coordinated community response. What is the legal framework? What are referral routes? These are all really important elements of perpetrator programs. So when thinking about our perpetrator programs, think about them in this broad way, not only from the perspective of the activities conducted directly with men. All these elements of perpetrator programs need to be set to be geared towards safety and well-being of survivors, because this is the goal of perpetrator programs and the interventions that we do. And we see that Europe-wide, although there are some challenges, things are moving into this direction, and this is now becoming a standard of good practice. I will focus now on understanding service-generated risks for survivors, and I will do that by making some examples by survivors, perpetrators, or professionals to be able to illustrate this. So as previously mentioned, we know that the goal of perpetrator program is to keep women safe and to increase their safety and well-being. However, we can have some, probably not some, but many survivors who say something like this. This time, it will be different. Mark started a perpetrator program. I feel much safer now. Or this, you triggered me. You need to stop triggering me. That's what I'm learning on my program. This is something that perpetrators might say. So what these sentences illustrate is that although we want to support survivors and make sure that violence stops and that survivors are safe, by enrollment in a perpetrator program, there are certain risks that appear. These risks could be that survivors hope that men will change, and then this influences their decision about how to plan their safety, or the risks that men use perpetrator program as a way to continue the abuse and continue harm. So perpetrator programs across Europe have more and more understanding that service-generated risks are there, and eventually they're there, but that programs need to have procedures in place to be able to identify these risks and mitigate these risks. We see some pitfalls in making this right. We see some programs that focus only on changing violent behavior toward men. We see some programs that don't have contact to survivor, don't provide support, don't gather information, or do it just once over the course of the program. So this is something that definitely needs to be improved. However, when we talk about standards in this aspect, what is a minimal standard and the good practice is that programs need to have integrated support for survivors, that there should be clear pathways for exchanging information and cooperating with survivor support services, and different procedures on how survivors are contacted, what kind of information they receive, how to react if there's an increased risk or worries from their end. And definitely that work with survivors and perpetrators is conducted by different professionals on separate locations. There are some typical pitfalls that I've previously mentioned, so I will not focus on that at the moment. Another really important area is understanding and addressing risks, because we know that in this sector, we work with live risk that is dynamic, that constantly changes. So this needs to be a part of our intervention. So I will illustrate this through several quotes. So for example, perpetrator program professional states, Stephen was assessed as low risk when entered the program, but now I'm even more worried for his partner. Or a professional who's saying the police assessed the risk 3 months ago, so there is no need that we assess the risk. So these quotes actually illustrate how sometimes, while being in a program, risk changes, and that we need to be alert to these changes of risk all the time. Also, it illustrates that when there are no clear procedures on how to assess risk, how to manage it, who should do what, we can actually have practices that are not safe. Regarding this, what are standards of good practice is that there should be continuous risk management and risk assessment, that we need to have information from survivors and from various sources whenever possible, that we need to have evidence-based risk assessment tools that incorporate proven risk factors, and that this needs to be something where the cooperation with other agencies is crucial. Europe-wide, we see some typical pitfalls, that programs focus on changing violent behavior, but not looking at risks, or while doing that they don't have evidence-based tools for that, or don't gather information from survivors, or that they assess risk only once at the beginning of the program, neglecting that this is something that changes all the time. We also had cases when in which risk assessment was reduced to psychological testing. So it's really important to know that although psychological testing can be a valid element of assessing perpetrators, we need to also focus on risk and use tools that are made for assessing the risks. Moving on to gender-informed perspectives and some of the quotes. So perpetrator program professional says, many in my group can manage their anger well in the professional context and other aspects of their lives. Or male professional saying to his female colleague, can you please make me a cup of coffee during the break? So what these quotes illustrate is that gender perspective is important for this work. And it's important not only on the level of the content while working with men. So will we focus on masculinities, gender equalities, or we will reduce our programs only on anger management or emotions management courses, but also that gender dimension interplays in relationships between facilitators, and that this is also a way how we can model gender equality. And there are also many other aspects of the functioning of the organization that is connected with gender. So perpetrator programs need to incorporate this perspective and to work with the ecological gender-informed model. It's really crucial that violence is understood as a gender-based phenomenon, and that this is reflected in a way how we interact with men, but also how we structure our organization and our intervention, from facilitators, how we form co-facilitation teams, how we make sure that women's voices are also in the group. Typical pitfalls are something that I've already mentioned. Another good practice that we encourage is adjusting perpetrator programs to different types of perpetrators. So we know that perpetrators are not homogenic category, and that we have male perpetrators of intimate partner violence. We also have female perpetrators, LGBTQI, juvenile perpetrators, sexual offenders, and we need to make sure that we have specialized interventions for each of these categories, because one of the typical pitfalls that we see is our interventions in a manner of one size fits all. We also know and see that good practices in perpetrator work is incorporating culturally sensitive approach and having inclusive programs, and also programs for different needs and risk levels. So we see that across Europe, we now have more balanced interventions. Some are more geared toward help seeking or responding early, while the risk of violence is still low. Then there's this behavior change work. That's something that we usually think about when we think about perpetrator programs, or intensive multi-agency case management, which is applied for high risk, high harm cases with complex needs who usually don't fit in standard perpetrator programs. So there are many elements of good perpetrator work. However, these are some core elements that I wanted to present as through the perspective of good practice, but also what are the common pitfalls in Europe. Now I have a pleasure to introduce you to European standards for perpetrator programs. This is something that WWP is currently working on, and we will launch standards in December. Why are these standards important, and why we decided to create these standards? That's because there is an imbalance between understanding of what works, what are elements of safe and accountable perpetrator work, while in practice we see that this is not applied. Sometimes there's not enough awareness of the key elements. Sometimes it's not so easy to implement that in the practice. So we wanted to create a balance and to make sure that what we know that works and that it's safe and effective is actually implemented in programs Europe-wide. Our standards are based on the research, so wide research, but also evaluation of perpetrator programs that our network is conducted, inputs from practitioners and different mappings, our own mappings and Council of Europe evaluations, which actually showed what are the elements of perpetrator work that are specific and specifically challenging to implement. These standards are created in a way to be Europe-wide, so to be geared toward the European context, but also contextualized so that they can be applied in different countries with different frameworks and different ways of organizing the framework around domestic violence and violence against women. And they focus on adult male perpetrators of violence against their female partners. They present minimal standards. They give indications not only for perpetrator programs, but also partner interventions, and they're focused on in-person perpetrator work. Here are sections and areas that our standards cover. I will not go in detail. I will invite you to join us on the launch event of the European Standards for Perpetrator Programs. There you will also be able to hear about the European accreditation system that we are currently developing, and the best way to stay in the loop with the work of our network is by signing up to our mailing list or a newsletter. I would like to thank you for having me at your conference, and I hope that we will be able to stay in touch and cooperate in the course of our next activities. Goodbye, and wish you a fruitful conference.